Smosh has had a longer and more important history than arguably anyone else on YouTube, being responsible for a lot of the website's firsts, including some of the platform's first viral videos ever.
Had 24 million views, the most viewed on YouTube space.
As well as one of the first copyright scandals.
But randomly, some removed it, claiming copyright.
Not to mention being among the first to make a living from YouTube, including normalizing methods of monetization that are now considered essential for any serious creator.
Because at the time when we started making brand deals and doing like sponsored videos and stuff, like people, that there wasn't like a precedent for that.
Yeah.
And so people were like, oh, you're a sellout. Like, and that was just kind of like the narrative.
But perhaps most significantly to their story is that they were one of the first to sell their channel to another company.
It was new territory. Like nobody had ever done this kind of stuff before. Nobody had ever sold a YouTube channel.
Expand to an ensemble cast.
And of course, you know these guys.
And well, break up.
I'm leaving Smosh.
Now, those last three firsts are widely considered to be some of the darkest days in Smosh's history. Well, other than the Smosh movie, but that's a whole other video.
Maybe one day, I'll be the one to massage that booty.
I'd like that very much, Ian.
But yes, losing ownership of their channel, expanding the cast, and Anthony leaving are widely considered three major wrenches thrown into the Smosh machine, even by the people working there.
We hired on 5 cast members, and they were like, put them in videos now.
They need to be in everything.
Oh, wow,
and
that's
you need to
jarring.
get as much of them in there as possible. You need to warm up the audience to them immediately.
When you left, I remember seeing it as the like #1 thing on Twitter. And that was the first time where I was like, whoa, this building is like, what we're doing is a big deal right now, and the eyes are on us. Not necessarily a great way. Like, this is definitely weird, and there was certainly a lot of us were like, is this gonna work? Every comment, every comment on every video was "Where's Anthony?" Particularly on the main channel, but everywhere. It was all over the place.
Yet fast forward to 2025, and Smosh is doing better than ever. Anthony came back and resumed ownership of the brand alongside Ian.
Anthony and I can say officially that we
own Smosh.
And the ensemble cast is now the backbone of the channels, allowing them to stay competitive at a time when consistent long-form content is overwhelmingly the best way for a channel to earn revenue. Now, at first glance, it might seem like Smosh surviving was a miracle, like it happened in spite of those bumps in the road. And if only Ian and Anthony had never made those mistakes, Smosh would still be at the top of YouTube. But in reality, I don't think that could be further from the truth. In fact, I would confidently say that the so-called missteps, especially Anthony leaving Smosh, are the only reason that the brand has managed to survive for 20 years. That had things gone any smoother, Smosh as we know it would have died years ago. Which sounds extreme, but in order for it to make sense, we have to start with the first domino in the dark days of Smosh, selling the company to Alloy Media, which would later become Defy. You see, while modern YouTube is a staple of media and entertainment, it took a while for the platform to get there. Like nowadays, if you heard somebody say that they're a full-time YouTuber, then you know most of what they're doing to make a living. They make videos that are meant to host ads and likely do sponsorships where they promote a product in exchange for some kind of direct payment from the company. And if they're really established, they might sell merch, do live shows, or incorporate streaming and podcasts to increase their short-term revenue. Simple enough, right? But during the first decade of YouTube, claiming YouTuber as a job title would have more than likely invoked a blank stare that's accompanied by loads of assumptions about you living in your parents' basement. And to some extent, those assumptions wouldn't have been unfounded. Like, while creators are so quick to rightfully call out the ways that the various platforms can do better, there has never been a better time financially to find success as a creator. I mean, in the earliest stages of what is now known as the YouTube Partner Program, only a handful of creators were invited to get paid at all. And even once these opportunities did start rolling out to more creators, the actual opportunities were severely limited. For example, YouTube initially refused to show any ads that would disrupt the viewing experience, which is rather laughable given more recent attempts to emphasize mid-roll ads even further.
The second thing we're going to be launching this week is a feature that allows you to add both automatic and manual ad slots on any mid-roll eligible video.
And while these days the vast majority of creators either operate independently or through partnerships with escape clauses, it was much more common back then for smaller creators to have to share revenue with multi-channel networks in order to gain higher ad rates, or sometimes even get monetized at all. Similarly, Smosh was relying on Alloy Media to sell ads on their website prior to Alloy eventually acquiring them.
A company who we'd been working with to sell ads on the website, to sell ads on Smosh.com.
But what also started to become more common was creators actually selling their channels outright. In fact, not only is this still a somewhat common occurrence,
You just sold your YouTube channels.
Yes.
How many channels was that?
4 channels.
Yeah.
5-6 million subscribers.
Holy.
The whole Theorist business is in someone else's hands.
I don't think you know this. Nobody knows this.
Huh.
I sold 10% of my company last October, of my YouTube channel.
Really?
Yeah.
But we eventually started to see creators buying back their channels at a possible loss.
I made it that if the business is successful and he's made a certain amount on his business within the first year, I can buy it back this month at $25,000 instead of whatever that share is worth. That share is worth a lot more.
Obviously, you're doing that.
Yeah.
Today, I am so happy to announce for the first time in 4 years, I am an independent creator again.
And for all these major decisions that a YouTube channel faces, Smosh was making them before anyone else. And the decision to sell their YouTube channel, unsurprisingly, would be the most significant of their early decisions. Because on the surface, that sounds kinda dumb to do, right? I mean, presumably by selling your channel, you have less control over how it's operated, you have a boss again when you previously didn't, and you no longer get to take home as large of a portion of your earnings. But wait, more recently, MatPat, widely considered to be one of the world's forefront experts on running a YouTube channel, had sold all of his channels to a corporation. Yeah, unsurprisingly, it's complicated. Because yes, those cons are very real. The creator likely now makes a base salary, meaning that in months where the channel is making crazy revenue, that means almost nothing for them. They also now have to answer to suits, meaning if the creator disagrees about the best path forward for the channel, they're likely going to be overruled, even when they know better. And this would later become a major issue for Smosh.
We had done Try Not to Laugh, and it blew up and it did really well. And for forever, we were like, hey, we should do more of those. And they were just always like, no. We finally started getting the chance to do them. And they, of course, they blew up.
But under the right circumstances, this move can come with some major pros, especially considering where Smosh was at in 2011 when they were acquired by what would eventually become Defy Media. See, one of the biggest problems that any up-and-coming channel has to deal with is the future. I mean, sure, you can bury yourself in your analytics and be confident that your channel will one day be profitable, but that doesn't mean much. For one, it's a lot harder to predict the when than the if, but also, if your channel won't be profitable for 2 years, for most people that means that YouTube isn't a viable path, because how are you supposed to survive for that long without a stable income? And even for creators who are at the top like Smosh, how do you know that your success is going to continue into the future? While yes, independent YouTube channels get to enjoy the more lucrative months, they also have to shoulder the stretches of lower earnings alone. Not to mention that running a channel usually comes with various expenses. Editors, props, crew, I mean, the costs add up quickly, especially for channels doing sketch comedy. Hence why most sketch-based channels have shifted to alternate monetization strategies. Some have pivoted to different content formats, like streaming or producing longer form shows behind paywalls, while others, like Smosh since Anthony's return, have leaned more into crowdfunding to support their content.
Okay, so we're on our own now, so if you want to support us directly, just hit the join button down below and you can become a member.
Thank you guys so much. I can't wait for you guys to see what we have in store.
And none of that mentions how unreliable sketches have become for monetization long term.
Nowadays, many of our YouTube videos are deemed controversial and don't make any money.
So for many creators, it can feel like they have to choose between getting paid a consistent but likely underwhelming salary or be unable to make YouTube videos at all. And no matter the drawbacks, getting paid just to make videos, that's the dream, right? And while this feeling is still very relevant today, just imagine finding yourself in this position back in 2011.
And yeah, I think like a lot of people can look back and say that was like a dumb idea selling. You can't predict like what's going to happen, especially in a space like new media.
Because there are two major differences to YouTube now that are easy to take for granted. I mean, what YouTube was trying to become is incredibly difficult even under the best of circumstances, as the swift rise and fall of various competitors make clear. But two, the idea of a channel having a long lifespan is actually more of a recent one.
We didn't know how long this was going to last. We were seeing YouTubers at that point like burning out.
I mean, even years after Smosh had been acquired, creators were operating under the assumption that there was a ticking clock that started the moment they found success.
We were like, okay, well, you know, this is YouTube. The maximum lifespan of a channel is 5 years. So we got one good year left. And we were like,
launch a new channel.
Let's launch a new channel.
As one kind of crests over the hill, like, let's launch the other thing. So that way this one is now the thing that's carrying forward. Well, this one kind of goes down. But we kept it alive and it's still going and stronger than ever.
So at the very least, if the business does go under, it's not really your problem. Any financial hardship is going to be shouldered by whoever owns the company. So instead of a creator having to experience the life-altering reality of a business failing, the downside is limited to being essentially laid off, which is still a major event, but one that is less likely to have a long-term effect. What's more, there are no qualifications to running a YouTube channel. All you have to do is be able to get and hold people's interest. So while yes, trial and error is enough to learn about the ins and outs of making videos, that's only a portion of what you actually do. I mean, just trying to establish an LLC, navigate business taxes, and handle payroll is a pretty large barrier that random 20-somethings likely aren't going to know how to do. In fact, it's this naivety around business that led to Ian and Anthony giving away Smosh effectively for free.
So it sounds like there was another third party, like they got the cash, you guys got stock, and then became salaried employees of what ultimately became Defy. Because Defy went out of business, is it safe to say like that, did you guys sell Smosh for $0?
Essentially.
Yeah, we sold it for a salary.
And the nature of this deal is incredibly important, because instead of receiving cash, Ian and Anthony received stock for what would be Defy Media. And while on the surface that sounds good, I mean, investing in stocks are a major component of most retirement plans, it's not always a great thing. For starters, this media company was not yet public, meaning actually being able to sell the stocks for cash would be more difficult than, say, selling your shares of Meta via Robinhood. And as any long-term trader will tell you, stocks are inherently worthless until you sell. All that your total stock portfolio value tells you is how much money you would receive were you to liquidate in this moment. But if the company were to go under before you could sell, that would be a problem. Any guesses what happened?
Regretfully, Defy Media has ceased operations today. We are extremely proud of what we've accomplished here at Defy, and in particular want to thank all the employees who work here.
Yeah, I'll get to that. Because while yes, there are a lot of negatives that came with this decision, it wasn't all bad. In the early days of this partnership, Defy was essential in helping Smosh expand its reach far more than Ian and Anthony could have alone.
I don't know how much of your story came prior to Defy versus after Defy, but like Smosh 2, Smosh Games, the website, I mean, like, you guys did a lot of stuff and you did it really well.
Not to mention opened the door to Smosh being way ahead of the curve when it came to monetization.
Really was only good at one thing, which was like selling ads in front of your videos, right? Like they were real, Defy, for all their faults, was good at that.
They were really good at that. They were great at coming to us with like, you know, like our Assassin's Creed 3 video was sponsored. It has 100 million views because we got full freedom because Defy was there to kind of, you know, broker that deal and make sure that we had full freedom to do whatever we wanted.
Because again, a YouTuber's role as a business owner is just as important as their role as, well, a YouTuber. And so any business, as it grows, is going to have to figure out how they want to expand. A quite infamous example of this are the YouTuber books, where creators were able to push novels out hard enough to become best-selling authors despite often lacking the talent or passion to make that pursuit ethical.
At some point, I think it just became the thing to do when you hit like 3 million subscribers. Gotta write a book now, I guess. Maybe it's because of how enticing it is to be able to add New York Times bestseller to your Twitter bio, or like many other things, maybe it's just because your manager told you could make a lot of money if you wrote a book.
But John, specifically, who are all of these people? Well, I'm glad you asked. Most of them are New York Times best-selling authors. Don't you read? That's totally fine, neither do they.
There are also YouTuber movies, where the creator is suddenly given a massive budget that they have no clue how to work with, and it comes with interesting results.
Oh my god, you know you're attractive, it's annoying.
Wow, amazing hair and I'm attractive?
Or video games, where the recognizable face is just slapped onto a soulless app.
And sad to say, I'm not even replaying my own game. Shameful.
Throughout the 2010s, it became kind of a known grievance that YouTubers were doing too much. They were just trying to dip their toes into as many things as possible, hoping that something would stick. And unfortunately, Smosh's trend-setting history also applied here.
And then we were like guilted into participating in every single thing that they brought us. So it was like games, comic book, the movie, it was a cartoons channel.
Shut up, cartoons!
Shut up, cartoons!
Smosh babies!
Somebody has to make those mistakes first to learn like what works and what doesn't work. So
did we make some mistakes?
Oh, yeah, we
made
did.
some fucking mistakes.
Because yeah, an independent creator can choose what trade-offs they want to make in order to expand, like outsourcing their editing so that they can be more consistent, or phasing out their more intricate content in favor of stuff that can be pumped out quickly. You get to decide how to prioritize profit against the integrity of your brand and self. But to a parent company, you're just an investment. You have to be doing everything possible to maximize profits. And for Ian and Anthony, remember, they had extra incentive to play along, since boosting the company's profits meant raising their stock value and pushing Defy closer to going public.
We we're constantly told, hey, we have this new thing, but it's gonna bring a lot of money for the company, and you have stock in the company, the more money that you bring in.
And because of their bad deal, that would be the only way for them to profit at all. But it started to become clear that Ian and Anthony were no longer enough for the plans Defy had for Smosh. I mean, the rate at which the brand was expanding was getting to such a point that even the duo had to acknowledge its absurdity.
So don't forget to check out our new channel, Smosh New Channels, where we talk about our new channels.
And don't forget to check out our behind the scenes channel of the channel, where we let you know about our other new channel.
And don't forget to check out our Smosh t-shirt channels, where we tell you where to buy our t-shirts.
Oh, and don't forget to buy our new t-shirts.
And our new bobbleheads.
So at first, they decided to expand their cast, but in a very different way from today. You see, until 2012, the lineup for on-camera talent on Smosh was fairly similar to Scott the Woz, where you had the main faces in every video and then any friends they could grab in more minor recurring roles. But how are Ian and Anthony supposed to be on camera for multiple pieces of content per week while still being involved behind the scenes? Well, they couldn't, which led to them finally bringing in more faces for the audience to grow familiar with, but not the ones you know today. See, the first major expansion to the cast was with the launch of Smosh Games, because gaming channels were becoming incredibly lucrative during this time, and objectively, they were kind of a no-brainer. Let's Plays generally took very little work, but would make good money since they could be stuffed full of mid-roll ads. So while nowadays, it's common for creators to establish a side hustle in streaming, back then it was more common for YouTubers to start gaming channels. And so Smosh recruited Lasercorn, Jovenshire, and Sohinki, 3 hosts from the Alloy-owned Clever Games, as well as Mari Takahashi, who was already the host of a weekly series on Smosh's second channel, what's now Smosh Pit. And so these 4 began to host Smosh Games, which would tackle both gaming news and Let's Plays among other niches in the gaming space. Because at the time, variety channels with multiple hosts were far more viable than now. And while Ian and Anthony did maintain a strong presence on the channel, the added cast members were doing the brunt of the on-camera work. However, the new cast members' appearances on the main Smosh channel were limited, as Ian and Anthony remained the only full-time cast members there. But the ambitions that Defy had for Smosh were just getting started, which meant that Ian and Anthony weren't going to be enough on-camera talent for any of Smosh's channels. I mean, Ian and Anthony, their time was precious.
100-hour work weeks with barely any break. On the weekends, it was constantly replying to emails and meetings. I can, like, looking back at the content, clearly see a shift right around there, 2014 to 2015, where it was, I just hated it.
And hell, Ian and Anthony have always expressed an interest in expanding Smosh beyond just them.
Our main goal is to sort of like just grow the Smosh brand, and then hopefully one day Smosh will be more than just me and Anthony. It'll just be entertainment for teens and young adults and anybody else that likes entertainment for teens and young adults.
So in 2015, around the production of their first movie, there was a big change.
You said the 5.
Keith, Noah, Courtney, Olivia, myself.
Okay.
It was us 5. We were the first people on for the Smosh Pit channel. They hired us to also be in sketches and stuff. They hadn't done that at that point.
Yes, there was a new cast of entertainers and actors who were brought on to not only run what's now Smosh Pit, but to regularly appear in the sketches on the main Smosh channel. And hell, it worked for Smosh Games, so what could go wrong? Right? Well, there was a really big difference. See, the Smosh Games cast would generally only make occasional appearances in the sketches when they needed a body. That wasn't the expectation. It would feel more like an Easter egg than anything else. But when it came to the second wave of cast members, later dubbed the Smosh Squad, both Anthony and Shayne Topp, one of the first additions to the cast, have repeatedly noted how rough this transition was. I mean, for starters, there's the fact that the YouTube audience doesn't always react well to change. It can take a long time for them to warm up to people. I mean, just look at the reception of Mari's debut on Smosh Pit compared to her later appearances. But also, these cast members were brought on more because it seemed like the next logical step to the suits at Defy, rather than there being a specific gap that they needed to fill.
The 5 of us were hired full-time, and there wasn't much for us to do, so we're just hanging out. The first year, really, we didn't have shows or anything.
And for Anthony, this expansion seemed to only widen the divide between him and Defy. Because while yes, Ian and Anthony did have ambitions of expanding their cast,
we had been sort of planning since 2008 maybe of building a cast of people, almost turning Smosh into a Saturday Night Live sort of situation where we find talented, funny people that could then create content with us.
It seemed like they saw it as the opportunity to handpick the successors that they would entrust with their legacy.
We could finally get off camera. And that was the plan, because we were talking to our first business partner, and he's like, what's your 10-year plan?
But of course, Defy didn't have those concerns. So as time went on, Ian and Anthony were considered less and less in making these decisions.
The last few months that I worked there, they started hiring new cast members and starting and stopping shows without consulting me first, which, you know, they had every right to. They owned the company. I was just an employee, but it hurt a little bit. I felt like I created this thing with my buddy and we should kind of be consulted about these things, but it was just a company.
And even with the initial cast, while Ian and Anthony were heavily involved in hiring them, that wasn't the case when it came time to actually introduce them. And it's a great example of Ian and Anthony knowing better than the suits, but ultimately being overruled.
Once we found this, initial core group of 5 extra cast members, there was this idea that Defy had that completely conflicted with what Ian and I were feeling, and that's that you guys should be slowly integrated in, introduced slowly, we warm people up to you. But then Defy was like, cool, now they're gonna be in everything. And that's where things started to I feel like there was a little bit of tension with the way that Defy wanted this cast to be incorporated versus the way that Ian and I felt like you should be incorporated to get the audience on board. And I think it was because the way that Defy hired you all on was 4-year contract, full time.
And behind the scenes, tensions began to rise between Ian and Anthony because of their experiences working for Defy.
I mean, it was weird because we had a really close friendship when we first started making the videos.
Yeah.
It was literally just us fucking around having a good time.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a great case study on what happens when 2 best friends decide to start a business partnership.
Yeah.
And also become roommates and not spend any time apart from each other.
More specifically, they developed a dynamic where Anthony would want to find ways to revolt and reclaim Smosh, while Ian was too appreciative of the opportunity to risk rocking the boat.
I still saw it as like, let's not like ruin a good thing. Like, I just for me, it's like, I was just like holding on to this thing because after this time, like we've seen mostly every channel that came up with us go away. And so I think I found myself kind of being like the mediator between like the issues you had with the company and the things that the company wanted to do.
In my own interpretation, I was like, I guess Ian's fine getting taken advantage of, and we didn't talk about that.
Right. And Anthony's frustration grew to the point that he tried to convince Ian to start a new company with him. Well, kind of.
I tried to get you to leave with me for a bit, but I could tell that you wanted to stay.
I don't think you tried that hard.
I didn't try that hard. You said I don't want to, and I said okay.
But the math just wasn't there to make it possible.
So much of what was keeping the main channel alive was the library. People going back and watching all of our older videos was what made that business model work.
So from Anthony's perspective, the whole concept of Smosh was something that he started in his free time for his friend.
My friend Ian and I were just hanging out, and I had this new webcam, and I was obsessed with learning every single thing about the internet and technology and things that I could do with it. These little lip sync videos that we would make on my own website. And I created this little copy paste box where it had instructions like Control A, then Control C, then go to your page, and then go to your MySpace editor and go press Control V. And I had all the instructions there. And when they did that, boom, it would go to their page and it would have the instructions pasted again. So that's how I made my own little viral chain.
But now he didn't have control over it creatively or from a business perspective. He was being forced into the box of being little more than a face for the company while still having to devote his life to holding everything together.
But that destroyed my mental health. It destroyed my relationships. I don't think that I really talked to my parents during that time. It was just Smosh, eat, and that was it.
And occasionally kiss a girlfriend.
Yes, when she wasn't angry at me because I spent 80 hours working on Smosh and not paying any attention. So.
Yeah.
Not to mention that some of Defy's more negative decisions were impacting his reputation that he had spent a decade building.
They just saw that some other YouTuber had started a Kickstarter to raise money, and they're like, ooh, you can do that too. Get some money from people. And there was no idea for that game. They were just like, put your face and reputation on the line, beg people for money for a game that has no concept whatsoever, and we'll just figure it out later. Let's just see how much we could raise.
I mean, to put it simply, Ian and Anthony were getting screwed. They were having to deal with the negatives of both owning a company and simply working for it, but without the benefits of either except what? Stability? Because they didn't even really get that.
Smosh is homeless.
Super homeless.
Yeah, so our parent company went out of business.
Was not our fault.
We
did everything right.
We did good. We're doing okay, yeah.
We're doing just fine. Doing a great job.
But shortly before Defy had shut down, this all came to a head on June 14th, 2017, in a video that blindsided everyone.
I know you've probably already read the title by now, but I feel like we should just come out and say it. I'm leaving Smosh.
And I would argue that this change ushered in what can only be described as the dark days of Smosh, where both parties, Smosh and Anthony, had reached a clear low point that made it seem certain that soon there wouldn't be a place for either on YouTube. Yet, believe it or not, this dark era was essential in allowing both parties to not only reunite, but elevate to a new high. See, for Anthony, this was the first time he had ever been alone as a YouTuber. I mean, at this point, he had grown accustomed to bouncing off of Ian for everything, both professionally and creatively. But all of a sudden, Anthony would only have his own judgment to work with.
To walk away from something that I created as a teenager with my best friend, which has now become something bigger than I'd ever imagined, is terrifying. I've never made anything on my own, really. I've never made things without Ian by my side.
And the channel lacked any real direction for a while. He did some parodies and other comedy videos, but they didn't really make sense in a lot of ways. I mean, why leave Smosh just to make the same thing, but without Ian or all of those resources? Like, the highs of the channel either stemmed from clickbaiting Smosh fans or Anthony getting other YouTubers to make guest appearances.
Just turn to the camera, he's like, hey, what's up, it's Anthony Padilla, I'm a total
and Smosh wasn't doing much better. See, for a lot of those external projects that Smosh was looking towards, you kinda needed Ian and Anthony. Like, no disrespect, it was a talented group running Smosh, but Ian and his squad wasn't nearly as much of a draw on, say, a movie poster or a mobile game as the original duo. And they were still dealing with Defy, which behind the scenes was also falling apart. Though I'll get to that. Also, YouTube was changing in a major way, where they were becoming increasingly hostile towards comedy videos, especially sketches. For starters, the shift in focus to selling mid-roll ads that occurred throughout the 2010s was a huge problem for videos under 12 minutes. With few exceptions, shorter videos all but died out during this time. And what's more, Smosh was a huge production at this point. With how expensive sketches are to produce, the genre was all but starting to die out.
That doesn't make any financial sense, and you can't do that anymore. That's why you don't see sketch comedy on YouTube.
Thousands and thousands of dollars, so much time and energy, huge production schedule
all
in
for
one day.
A 4-minute video. If you get 1 million views on it, you're lucky to make a couple $1,000s.
Yeah.
And
that barely covers.
That doesn't cover the cost.
That doesn't cover the production cost.
So it makes zero sense.
With what was then College Humor, another staple in comedy on YouTube since the beginning, eventually ending the production of their sketches in favor of making unscripted content on an exclusive streaming service.
But against all odds, Dropout survived. No one believed in us. Not our corporate parents, not the industry at large, heck, not even some of us.
I thought you'd be bankrupt in a week.
And that's only the beginning. See, in the mid-2010s, variety channels started to become more common. One example being that established creators would recruit smaller YouTubers to essentially host spin-offs on their channel. This would allow them to increase their output, as YouTube was heavily rewarding frequent uploads at the time. Most famously, this included MatPat over on Game Theory and Shayne Dawson recruiting smaller creators that would appeal to fans of their primary content without having to sacrifice the quality or quantity of the videos they were originally known for. So this was great for Smosh, as it meant they could respond to Anthony's departure by leaning heavily on the expanded cast for the Smosh Pit channel. But in practice, their approach was sloppy and just not viable long term, partially because they were pushing the cast into roles that they didn't fit, like Courtney Miller hosting a girly slumber party show.
It just was like so pigeonholed into like, you're girls and you're girls.
Yeah.
When they would later come out as gender fluid.
Like gender fluid, I want to be a puddle that makes people horny. Don't clip this.
And Shayne was basically given a Bill Nye-esque show.
The show that I got was Smosh Lab, where we did science experiments every episode. Yeah, I remember being like, so I'm
What?
I'm the science guy?
Yeah.
What?
That's what I think of when I see you.
Despite him being a character actor, not a scientist. What's more, the various series on the channel were all so different from each other, it was left without any tangible identity.
Well, here's the thing too. Like, say somebody saw Whoa Nature Show and they're like, oh my God, I love this. Subscribe. And then the next day they're like, what is this 1 hour song machine? I'm not into this music show.
Yeah.
Whoa, what is this science show? This isn't what I subscribed for.
In short, they were casting out as many nets as they could, but they were doing so right as the YouTube algorithm began to shift yet again. Because as the scope of YouTube videos continued to grow, and they wanted to have more mainstream appeal, it no longer made sense for the platform to force channels to prioritize quantity of uploads. Because ultimately, that approach would limit the ceiling on how good a YouTube video could be. I mean, you never could have had a Mr. Beast rise if he couldn't take his time maximizing the quality of each and every video. And at this point, traditional media like late night talk shows began to completely take over YouTube, as full productions were the only ones that could maximize both quality and quantity. In fact, it was at this point that YouTubers began to fear that the platform would no longer be a creator-driven one, and the annual rewinds focusing more and more on mainstream celebrities only reinforced this anxiety.
Yeah. It's rewind time.
So instead, YouTube started to reward a different kind of consistency. Quality, but also predictability. I mean, a lot of YouTube channels that used to have multiple series running now stick to one primary format. And this was a huge problem for a brand going through an identity crisis, as the Smosh channels still were in 2017.
Here's when Smosh Pit actually got to a place where I thought it wasn't going to be around much longer. It was not getting good views around this time because we had Put It in My Mouth, we had Whoa Nature Show, we had Smosh Lab, we were trying to do squad vlogs there. They tried to have a show for Keith called 1 Hour Song Machine. So they wanted a show of like every genre on one YouTube channel.
Or every personality. That's kind of what I was thinking.
You were kind of right, but that stretched this channel apart, and it was all so different that it wasn't getting good views because it wasn't like a consistent place. And it was like, what do you come to this channel for?
And since the direction of Smosh was being decided by suits that weren't creators, it meant that Smosh was very late to adapt to this change.
They were like, the whole point of this week is that we're gonna do more content. It was just like, let's just work double time and put way more shit on it. So much stuff like that happened at Defy where they just like pumped ridiculous, like, you know.
And in general, the corporate structure that they were adhering to made it way more difficult to pivot their content strategy quickly enough to keep up. But finally, they did. In 2018, the two main Smosh channels became incredibly niche, both revolving almost entirely around a core series. For Smosh Pit, it was their improv comedy show.
It's 2017. That was when we finally did Try Not to Laugh. It didn't start to pick up as a series until 2018. And that's when Smosh Pit started to like blow up.
While for the main channel, it was mostly the Every Blank Ever series, which would widely apply absurdist humor to various relatable scenarios. And while this led to increased success, it still came at a cost. I mean, creatively, it kinda sucks to be stuck making the same video over and over and over again. Not to mention maintain quality.
It was every week for a couple years. So we would, the way we would film them back then is we'd film like 3 in one day. So we would film an episode and it was just us 5. It was Keith, Noah, Olivia, Courtney, and I. So it would be us 5 doing 3 in a row. And honestly, there was something about how insane that was that it sometimes worked. But you also watch and you look back and the jokes are not,
They're inside jokes.
There's a lot of inside jokes. I also don't think the jokes are as good.
I mean, in some ways, this pillar of online comedy was becoming more and more like a content mill. But hey, a little creative restriction is worth it if it finally leads to a growing brand, right? And against all odds, Smosh became more successful than they had ever been on modern YouTube.
We were planning a celebration, I actually think, because we had Smosh Main, Smosh Pit, both had the best views ever. And
subscriptions were up to like, or it was like up 600%.
Yeah, everything was doing great. So we were like, oh my God, we've never been more successful.
But that wasn't enough to prevent everything from falling apart, because November 6, 2018 marked the end of Defy.
And he's like, do you guys see this email? And it's an email saying that we've all been effective immediately laid off.
Yeah. Everybody at once.
Everybody.
Like, go get your paycheck in this office right now. Goodbye.
So going into 2019, let's review where we are. Anthony is barely keeping his name alive, while Smosh no longer exists. I mean, let's be real, it's starting to look like I clickbaited you pretty good, right? I mean, these are two of the most incredible downfalls in the history of YouTube, yet somehow this chapter saved Smosh? Well, the story's not over, because at such historic low points, there's nowhere to go but up. So let's start with Anthony. There was one key component to his status on YouTube that he had been leaning on pretty heavily, but not very effectively: his connections. I mean, Ian and Anthony are essentially YouTube royalty. Any part of doing YouTube for a living can be traced back to them in some way. So for any YouTubers over the age of 25, when Smosh calls, you pick up the damn phone. Now at first, Anthony was using these connections for the kind of unfocused and essentially random collabs that were common on YouTube in the 2010s. But remember, the new meta was all about making your videos more niche and longer. So for all the nets Anthony was casting out, one of these formats was perfect for redefining himself on YouTube: interviews. I mean, think about it. He had the clout to gain access to all kinds of interesting people, and unscripted videos are usually way more efficient to produce, not to mention make it far easier to hit longer runtimes. And when done right, this all means better watch times and ad rates, which usually leads to more views. Also, unscripted nonfiction videos were a far departure from what Anthony was doing on Smosh, which helped fix the channel feeling like a discount version of what he had left behind. I've talked about this before, but there are countless examples in YouTube history that show that treating a second channel as a completely separate entity, rather than a spin-off bonus channel, can lead to creators finding greater success than how they made their names in the first place. I mean, this had worked for Shayne Dawson, MatPat, Tobuscus, Rhett and Link, and now Anthony. So heading into the 2020s, Anthony went from struggling to be remembered to consistently getting millions of views with each upload, and things started looking up for Smosh as well.
And now we can announce that Rhett and Link have bought Smosh and made us a part of Mythical Entertainment, which we are so excited about because they are creators helping creators. It really is an awesome thing. We get to do whatever we want, and we're super, super excited.
Yes, after months of uncertainty, Rhett and Link bought Smosh. This was huge because not only would this afford Smosh a similar level of resources to Defy, but they were now owned by creators, people who knew what they were doing. I mean, Rhett and Link are two of the most successful YouTubers ever, both in terms of longevity, but also sheer impact. So Smosh would now have two owners that would be more hands-off, understanding that Ian was in the best position to handle the day-to-day of running Smosh.
In my heart of hearts, I never felt like Smosh was ours. Smosh was Ian's. Smosh used to be yours and Ian's. And it was successful. The stuff that we knew that we could do to help reset Smosh up, was like, all right, we're gonna do that, and we don't want to come in and say, do it this way.
However, they could still provide valuable insight that they've gained from running a similar operation to theirs.
Like, Rhett and Link's people are like giving advice and trying to help us, like, hey, this is some ideas and like be better, but like you don't have to do this if you don't want. Like it's like a very collaborative thing. It like when that does happen, but for the most part it's been like us. Like there's no like creative director that's telling us like you need to make a science show. Or what? A nature show.
Yeah. For example, one of the first moves by the new Smosh was emphasizing podcasts on a separate channel, as it's a great way to boost revenue in exchange for doing fairly little work. And all of the lessons that Rhett and Link learned from their own podcast ear biscuits, they were readily available to Smosh. And spoilers, by 2024, Smosh would produce the 9th biggest podcast in the US, Smosh Reads Reddit Stories. But I know what you might be thinking. Great history lesson, but so what? I mean, the next major event is Anthony returning to Smosh, yet I had claimed that getting screwed by Defy, expanding their cast in spite of the backlash, and Anthony leaving the company were all essential to Smosh reaching new highs. What's crazier, I said that without those 3 events almost ending Smosh, the brand would have likely died years ago. How the hell can that be right? Well, let's start with the cast. See, from Anthony leaving in 2017 to him and Ian buying Smosh in 2023, there were 5 people that were incredibly important to keeping Smosh alive. The first 2, of course, were Rhett and Link, who helped to provide the funding to keep things going and were completely supportive of parting ways with Smosh at the right time.
I took a meeting with the 2 of them and I said, Anthony wants to come back, but he's not gonna do it unless we own it. Link specifically was like, I don't even like want to talk about the business part of it. I just want to talk about like how exciting this is. And they were both like very supportive. Like they're like, look, we'll figure out the business side of it. we'll figure that out. But that's not the most important thing. Like, how do we make this happen?
Because crucially, Rhett and Link had no issue from day one putting ego aside and recognizing that ultimately, the best case scenario for Smosh is getting Anthony involved once more.
Right after like our first conversation with Ian, we were like, what can we do to get Anthony to come back?
Really? You guys were talking about that from the beginning?
Oh yeah.
We just always had this sort of instinctive pull for you guys to be together. We're very sympathetic to internet comedy duos.
Yeah.
And the idea of you guys being together and creating was just something that we always believed in, but we weren't gonna push it. We would ask questions about it, but we weren't gonna push it.
Like, when you consider that Anthony's one condition for returning was that he had to own Smosh again, and Rhett and Link had provided invaluable insight that Smosh would now be able to use as competition, all it would have taken is a spark of ego for the entire thing to implode. Now, the third key figure to this era was Courtney Miller. See, Courtney was part of the first wave of new cast hired for the Smosh Pit channel, and despite being only 19, she had already made quite a name for herself on Vine. What's more, they were incredibly ambitious coming into Smosh, looking for opportunities to rise above their station. Though, like with most things, the suits at Defy were incredibly dismissive of this.
I've, for a long time, like wanted to be more like creatively involved and not just writing and being in the videos. Like, I had all these ideas all the time, and so I would go to somebody at Defy and be like, I have this idea, say it was a show or merch or whatever, and like they would go, cute, okay, go back to get your makeup for the video, bye-bye.
I got like a stern talking to of like, hey, you need to know your place.
Oh, because you were like too excited about being a content creator?
And like contributing, yeah. I was seen as I was stepping on people's toes, this 19-year-old with no power.
But on top of growing their skills as an entertainer, Courtney kept learning about producing content in the hopes of getting their chance to shine behind the camera. So when Defy suddenly shut down, Courtney stepped up as one of the most willing to do whatever it takes to make this work, even though there was no guarantee of this paying off.
And we were still holding on to hope of like, this is all gonna come back. Yeah. Everything's gonna come back the same. And I mean, at least for me, I can speak, you know, got into December and like towards late December, I was like, all right, this may be over. I was like,
it was scary.
This is starting to get scary.
Because we were in silence. We had radio silence because Ian couldn't tell us really what was happening.
And once Smosh was operating under Mythical, Courtney immediately stepped up as one of the company's main directors, applying everything they had quietly learned over their time at Smosh. Eventually, they were not only entrusted with directing some of Smosh's biggest events ever, such as a live roast meant to commemorate Anthony's return, but they were permitted to still appear as on-camera talent. And this dedication led to Courtney being retained as one of the only full-time cast members of Smosh, as they slowly transitioned to more of a freelance model for talent like Dropout. Next up, there was Shayne. Coming into Smosh alongside Courtney, Shayne was one of the most experienced when it came to working in entertainment, as he was actually a child actor.
Listen, I'm the student council president of Briarwood.
Don't you guys have like your own private jet?
Helicopter.
In addition to having previously worked on a televised sketch comedy show, So Random.
Back in the kitchen, Ma!
So with the vacuum left by Anthony's departure, Shayne eventually found himself being looked at as the on-camera number 2 of Smosh.
Smosh at 100% strength. Smosh at 99%.
Oh
God,
my God.
No comment.
He often said our jokes were very similar. They just made merch about mine.
And not only is he one of the few cast members to be retained on a full-time basis post Smosh's independence, much like Courtney, but he also makes more appearances across Smosh's channels than anyone else.
So I had to start actively telling them like, hey, I need a break in our shoot weeks.
Yeah.
Because we would film almost all of our content for a month in a week.
As well as being made the host of the most shows.
Welcome to Smosh Reads Reddit Stories. I'm Shayne.
Welcome back to Smosh Mouth. I'm Shayne.
Hello, welcome to Who Memed It. Hi.
Can I identify someone based only on their top 3 favorite movies? Hello, welcome to Beppardy. I'm Shayne.
And much like Courtney, the opportunity for Shayne to step up in such a major way was only possible because of the vacuum left by the loss of Anthony and Defy. Now finally, the most important name here is, unsurprisingly, Ian. Like, it's hard to give enough credit to the level of dedication he put into keeping Smosh alive. Because remember, part of the tension between Ian and Anthony by 2017 was Ian's lack of willingness to take risks or stray too far out of line. Yet in a complete 180 from this, Ian responded to Defy's closure by kind of stealing Smosh back.
So nobody's telling us to do this.
Yeah.
But I was given access to all the channels, so we're just Ian hacked
the mainframe.
So we're just gonna be putting out some stuff.
It's gonna be old school.
So we basically had to just take things in our own hands. I contacted somebody. I was like, "Hey, do you have access to the channel?" And then I got access to the channel. Let me just put up videos.
What's more, Ian was the one to facilitate the next acquisition of Smosh.
You know, we had sold Smosh years and years and years ago to Defy. So when Defy went out of business, then it was in the hands of the bank. And it was just going to be sold to the highest bidder, essentially. A guy that I knew, we started trying to find a way, build a business plan, and essentially like pitch Smosh to investors and try to pull together like an investing party to get the monies to buy it.
And also personally took care of ensuring the channel's output during this time of uncertainty.
You know, we had some people come out and shoot for us just because they had always shot with us. So they're, you know, they believed in what we were doing. I mean, I paid some editors out of pocket.
Yeah.
Like I just, you know, the show had to go on.
Yeah, we filmed some videos on my iPhone. I edited those on Final Cut. Yeah, we all did a little extra.
I had to learn how to upload to YouTube again.
Because, yeah, Ian was forced to step up and lead in a way that was in stark contrast to him in the past.
When I left, and especially when Defy collapsed and Ian was kind of left there making a lot of those decisions, he had to be the leader that had to lead by example and get everyone you know, on board with his ideas. And that was a really unique role for him because he was kind of forced into that position and he was forced to get really good at it. And I think, you know, over the 6-year time period that I was gone, I've seen him, you know, observing from the outside, I've seen him get better and better at that role.
It's like Smosh is gone and all these people are just gone. They don't care. And I remember talking to Ian and being like, hey, like, so what are we gonna do? And I remember like this look of just, it's still Ian where like everything's very casual and just kind of shrugged off almost, but I remember him just being like, we're gonna figure it out.
And again, Anthony's main issue with Ian prior to his departure was his lack of confidence asserting himself. So unbeknownst to Ian, his taking up an actual leadership role was laying the groundwork for Anthony's return.
I saw from the outside Ian taking this lead and having, you know, opinions that he put his foot down on and leading this entire cast and elevating everyone for their strengths and also showing up himself as a host and a leader and a boss and a daddy. I think that was one thing that really made me interested in the prospect of coming back in and joining forces again.
Not to mention that Ian had managed to build a lot of goodwill amongst the people he worked with. In addition to Shayne and Courtney, others were more willing to bet on Ian despite having every reason not to.
We went back to a lot of those employees and said, like, we're bringing it back. Do you want back in? And it was really cool to see how many people were, I think a few of them had already taken on new jobs and they left it to come back with us.
What's more, Smosh has one of the highest long-term retention rates for cast. While the original Smosh Games crew has long since moved on, the so-called Smosh Squad are pretty much all still involved to some capacity, even a decade later, which is a lot more important than it sounds. Since the YouTube audience tends to resist change, the fact that Smosh hasn't had a hugely negative shakeup in cast since Anthony's departure has led to the expanded cast being beloved. And even when it comes to newer additions, people are much more willing to give them a chance since they're usually soft launch in some way, like Tommy Bowen and Spencer Agnew, who are both crew members willing to make occasional appearances on camera before eventually being promoted to full cast. And I think something that really helps with this is the freedom that seems to be given to the cast. See, with other YouTubers, there have been rumors that some will actively try to prevent their employees from being able to find success outside of the company, especially as a public figure.
He says, there's a perplexing fear that people will leave LTT and start their own thing if given a platform. So if that platform could threaten negative things coming out about your company or you probably want to squash it too. In my experience, there is a belief that everything you accomplish, no matter how much is created by your own effort, is actually due to Linus giving you a platform.
He didn't want anyone to get more popular or have more of a way out necessarily. Like, oh, I'm doing my Twitch thing on the side. Don't do that because you could get famous and leave. and talk about me negatively.
And even Defy allegedly tried to make similar moves against Anthony while he worked for them, with them trying to take over his personal Twitter, successfully taking his public Facebook page, and preventing him from joining the Screen Actors Guild despite him being eligible. You also have BuzzFeed Video, which basically spent the 2010s creating breakout stars who couldn't get away fast enough once they grew too popular to remain under their control.
There was a standoff happening because they had done this stupid contract that I was refusing to sign, that they had tricked, I feel like, tricked the entire company into signing.
The image release waiver was broad reaching. It basically was like, we own your likeness in any way we want to do it.
It specifically said
forever.
we would own your life story.
But in the case of Smosh, their cast is encouraged to continue pursuing their passions. Like Angela Jaratana starring in commercials and short films, Shayne continuing his acting career, and Damian Haas developing both a significant streaming and voice acting career.
I'm a voice actor. I think we just found our lunch.
So when you remember just how uncertain any career in entertainment is, then yeah, why wouldn't these cast members come in a few times per month to shoot in order to add a consistent income to the more sporadic work of Hollywood? Also, while Ian was the most beloved face of Smosh when Anthony departed, he had the wisdom and foresight to know that that shouldn't be relied on long term.
My job was to try to shine the spotlight on everybody and say like, hey, it's not just me here.
And we can see just how powerful this mentality can be with Dropout, once College Humor. Since CEO Sam Reich has maintained good relationships with the company's cast dating back over 15 years, the modern cast is a diverse blend of up-and-coming talent alongside established favorites. So much like Smosh, their cast is arguably more beloved than ever before in the company's decade-long history, and I think most would agree that this is their strongest lineup. What's more, having an expanded cast would vastly broaden what Smosh was capable of, since again, Ian and Anthony's whole background is them just doing their style of videos, and the strength became really pronounced as Smosh shifted to focusing on improv comedy. See, if unscripted, longer content is the way forward, then improv is the perfect answer. Hence why the Try Not to Laugh series basically kept the company alive for a time.
It exploded. That was when Try Not to Laugh became this behemoth. It was what our whole channel was based on. And we used to film so much of it. We have like a Try Not to Laugh every other week nowadays. We used to have it every week. It was every week for a couple of years.
Only problem is, this is an area that Anthony readily admits to struggling with.
Sketches, it's all pre-planned, it's all pre-written and shot listed and figured out down to a T beforehand. And if you mess up during it, cut, do another take.
Right.
But the way that Smosh Pit had evolved, it felt very high stakes. And all of you are so talented, coming in and feeling like I had to live up to that, was very difficult.
Good thing they can hire someone like Amanda Lehan Kanto, who specifically has a background in improv and theater.
So when I got into Groundlings, that was another thing. It wasn't just improv, it was characters. I immediately loved doing characters. And so when I started doing them in Groundlings, I remember my director, he was so great. He pulled me aside and he was like, you can just lose yourself in a character.
I mean, hell, the fact that Amanda's background is specifically not online has led to some of Smosh's most viral moments.
He was probably talking to him.
You're now dealing with the trauma that everyone else dealt with.
Harambe deserved to live.
I know.
Is there a protest that I can go to?
Similarly, Shayne's background as a character actor has come in handy both for scripted and unscripted videos.
Because in the beginning, you started kind of as the character guy, I'd say. You know, you started off with your Tom Cruise impression.
Yeah, which we organically thought of.
Low-key, I was like, I am so glad I don't have to do character impersonation. I suck at those. But you've always excelled at your character impersonations.
So thanks to these 5, as well as the many others working at Smosh, the company entered somewhat of a modern golden era under Mythical in a way that's pretty rare from a YouTube brand running for so long. And with a now established ensemble cast, Smosh was able to survive Anthony leaving without having to just rely on Ian. Eventually, they were left with a team that would allow for countless new avenues of content to open. So while initially not having Anthony seemed like the end of the company, nowadays, the majority of their uploads don't even have Ian or Anthony, and yet the views are still great. In fact, the podcast that Shayne and Amanda host, Smosh Mouth, has consistently performed better than Ian and Anthony's podcast, Lunchtime with Smosh. And here's the thing, I think this probably goes a long way in keeping Anthony invested in Smosh. Like, the business isn't entirely based on his face anymore, so he can have more of a behind-the-scenes leadership role like he wanted, while still being able to focus on the interviews he clearly enjoys. enjoys. I would imagine this helps prevent him from getting sick of either. What's more, since his channel and Smosh clearly have some kind of overlap behind the scenes, the Smoshcast now actually hosts the Assumption series on his personal channel. In fact, Anthony announced that his personal channel would be fully embracing the Smosh brand and cast going forward, thus allowing him to take this even further.
And I'm most excited about the fact that the channel is now going to evolve with this Smosh-centric flair to it. A little bit more lighthearted, a little bit more fun, but still very much so about the connection, the human connection.
What's more, his production company would finally join Smosh officially.
Press-alike is officially part of Smosh.
So Anthony is getting to make the move that plenty of long-term YouTubers have opted for, which is phasing out their role as a needed face. So not only did the controversial cast additions sustain Smosh during its darkest period, but they also provide Anthony with plenty of incentive to stay on board. The moment he gets tired of doing something creatively, he has a talented lineup that he could outsource to. But okay, next is Defy. I mean, everyone at Smosh talks about this company with such negativity, understandably so. Yet somehow I'm convinced that this needed to happen for Smosh's survival. I mean, surely this is where my knack for clickbait gets exposed, right? No. It definitely sucked, and there were negatives that shouldn't have been there, but there were still a fair amount of positives. The first one being, fittingly, the floor. Or at least that Defy offered Smosh a financial floor at the most important time for them to have one. See, the years in which Smosh was owned by Defy was arguably the most volatile time on YouTube. Period. I mean, not only was there the strong shift to prioritizing longer unscripted content, which directly goes against the foundation of Smosh, but there was also the adpocalypse, where because YouTube was becoming mainstream, they were placed under increased scrutiny by their advertisers. So when certain creators began to provide terrible publicity for the company, advertisers began to pull out en masse, affecting the earnings of nearly every creator.
Some inflammatory articles are posted about how major brands are being advertised on top of very vile YouTube videos. A bunch of advertisers fearing backlash removed their ads entirely from YouTube, and during this period, every YouTuber saw a decrease in revenue.
And even when the advertisers came back, it was to a YouTube that was much more hostile to content that was once considered okay. Anything that could be considered controversial or offensive was now far less likely to make money. This was especially bad for comedy, which often holds a mirror to bad things that are happening. But that distinction wasn't important to YouTube. If you were saying or doing something ironically, that was no different than the real thing. So when you remember that this shift risked tons of channels going under, it can only be beneficial to have a parent company that, at least short term, can provide some relief for the loss of revenue. And that's not the only pro that comes from a larger purse. Trial and error is a huge part of any YouTuber strategy. Being able to experiment with content can allow someone to stumble into a gold mine that they never would have otherwise found. Problem is, every experiment comes with a fair amount of risk. I mean, you have to put the time, energy, and money into making these new types of content. And if it flops, you're the one who has to eat that cost. But under Defy, Smosh was making moves, doing on-location content events, making a mobile game, and all kinds of ventures that even if a YouTuber had the pockets to do, they likely wouldn't have known where to start. And yeah, almost all of these projects were failures to some degree, but they were failures that Defy paid for. But all of the knowledge gained from these failures, Ian and Anthony got for free. Now that they are in charge of the company's purse, they aren't going to approach something like a movie or game without having far more reason to think it's viable. I mean, even the cast of Smosh have acknowledged that Defy allowed them to do things that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to do.
Yeah, I mean, I got to give them credit. Like, we were able to do a lot of stuff, and we were able to use a lot of resources.
Yeah, we had good resources.
Yeah. So I mean, like, I can't completely dump on Defy.
Totally.
Like, they got us to where we were at.
Mm-hmm.
We just needed better leadership, and we needed a company that was actually behind us.
The quality of the videos rapidly started increasing, and they started offering us to do more and more projects.
We did some movies.
We did comic book, live stream.
There was a magazine. There was 2 issues of a magazine.
A mobile game. A lot of stuff.
A sentiment echoed by MatPat, one of the forefront experts on content creation that was working with Smosh on behalf of Defy.
And to be fair, I mean, like, I don't know how much of your story came prior to Defy versus after Defy, but like Smosh 2, Smosh Games, the website, I mean, like, you guys did a lot of stuff and you did it really well. As an employee of the company that was Defy.
So in the modern day, we've seen Smosh lean more into live events to great success. Not to mention their increased reliance on improv and personality-driven content. So while it is important for a company of this size to find ways of making money outside of YouTube, Smosh is now much less likely to waste their time doing so. Also, this is a little more speculative, but if I had to guess, I would think that Anthony, and especially Ian, learned a lot about running a YouTube channel as a company from working with Defy and Mythical. I mean, there are all kinds of considerations that the average person would be completely in over their heads trying to keep up with. Remember, there's no qualification for being a YouTuber other than being able to hold people's interest. That's literally it. I think this also gave them the wisdom to know that while they should be the owners of Smosh, they would be better off outsourcing roles like CEO and CFO to more qualified people that they trust.
Allie, the CEO, right there.
And then most importantly, you have Anthony leaving. The single worst day in Smosh's history, the day that would dominate the comments of every video for years to come. The origin of the infamous question,
where's Anthony?
Where's Anthony? And I
Where's
don't know.
Anthony? Where's Anthony?
I should have left with Anthony.
Where is he?
He hasn't even returned my text.
That makes sense.
Where's Anthony?
This is my impersonation of Anthony Padilla.
He left. He's gone. I feel like he's way more successful over there.
Don't ask what Anthony.
So where is Anthony?
Found him.
How could that possibly have been for the best? Well, for starters, we just talked about how the expanding cast has become a major component to Smosh's ongoing success. Well, think about how different YouTube is these days, and Smosh's focus on longer, more consistent, unscripted videos. It wouldn't be sustainable if Ian and Anthony were required to appear in every video, especially when they've long since wanted to transition to a mostly behind-the-scenes role. But I think it's because it wasn't an option to just keep playing the hits with Ian and Anthony that the cast was able to shine and get the spotlight. They had to because that crutch was gone. It was time to sink or swim, and they swam. And it might sound like I'm speculating a bit, but this is a known issue for creators, where they find themselves feeling like they have to fall back on established means of success that ultimately hold back their possibilities long term. Like the same exact thing can be observed with Ned Fulmer being ousted from the Try Guys.
Ned Fulmer is no longer working with the Try Guys.
It blindsided the group and made things seem incredibly uncertain going forward, yet they're doing a lot better now than anyone could have expected. I mean, Zach went from almost leaving the group to being instrumental in keeping them alive. And it's because of exactly what I'm describing.
I felt that the success of the company hinged on continuing to play the song over and over again, and I was sick of that song. Then the world blew up, and I found a way to make it my creative identity again.
He felt trapped in having to do what worked but wasn't fulfilling. But Ned being ousted forced them to start taking risks and moving things in a different direction. They had to leave their comfort zone in a way that they likely wouldn't have otherwise.
So we are officially expanding the cast, and we're gonna keep growing and working with new friends, working with new people all the time. This is more than the Try Guys.
And wouldn't you know it, they've now had another founder, Eugene, step back into a purely behind-the-scenes role while expanding to an ensemble cast. Sound familiar? Also, not having Anthony's presence on the channel for 6 years meant that him coming back in an almost guest-like capacity, at least on camera, would still be a marked improvement for fans of the old Smosh without alienating the newer wave.
There's a small portion of the new audience that is very vocal where they're like, what the everything's gonna change. Everything that I liked that's been established for the past however many years is different now because Anthony's coming back on and owning this with Ian.
Obviously, what's really happened is we're getting truly, I think, a best of both worlds. And it's just all of it.
All this to say that, while I think that the current model for Smosh is ultimately the best option for them, they likely wouldn't have discovered it unless they were forced to make it work in spite of the short-term losses. Or hell, if Anthony never left and the duo realized this shift needed to happen in the 2020s, the initial resistance might have caused them to go back on it and continue to just mainly lean on Ian and Anthony. But with Anthony out of the picture, there was nowhere to go but forward, to what would eventually become the most sustainable version of Smosh yet. It also helps a lot that since Anthony's goal is to make less appearances on camera, he returned to Smosh with the attitude that he should figure out how to help everyone who's already there excel further at what they're doing, rather than overhaul the entire business, a fear that the Smosh cast had.
I won't lie to you, I was scared at first.
When
you first walked in, I think I was at first just like, what's happening? And then I remember going, oh, what are they gonna do?
And then there are the less data-driven reasons that are rooted in grounded speculation, because we're dealing with feelings, which I'm totally great with no matter who tells you otherwise because they're just too sensitive and I'm not gonna make that my problem. Anthony was the one who was growing to be so jaded with not only working at Smosh, but also working with Ian. So if instead of spending those 6 years rediscovering how to enjoy the process of content creation, he had gritted his teeth and stayed at Defy, I think Smosh could have ended entirely. Like fast forward to today, where we're seeing more and more YouTubers step back and retire. When Defy shut down, I don't know if Anthony and Ian together would have been able to steer the ship over to Mythical. I think Anthony might have just taken it as a sign to walk away since he wasn't enjoying the work at this point anyway, and Ian would have been left unwilling, or more likely unable, to find a new home for Smosh while also having to contend with Anthony's departure. And then even if Ian still managed to make it work, it likely would have been impossible for the two to work together again. Anthony leaving the company when they were seemingly in a safe place after years of displeasure is very different than had he left when things were at their worst. One would feel far more like a direct betrayal. And this might sound weird, like I'm entering the realm of parasocial fanfiction, but I'm basing this off of what Ian and Anthony have said. Specifically, that the time apart was essential to them eventually reconciling their friendship.
And I feel like this, does sum up why we did need those 6 years apart, because it's so hard to like break the ice and make us both feel comfortable coming together.
Yeah. Also, there's the fact that Anthony's main demand in coming back to Smosh was that he regained ownership of the company. So let's say if when Defy had shut down in 2018, Anthony was still at the company. Getting to this point in 2025 would have required the sequence of events that him and Ian were sick of each other but kept working together, Anthony didn't jump ship despite already wanting to leave, Anthony helping Ian to fund Smosh despite the lack of passion, this duo pulling it together well enough to get Mythical to buy them, Anthony and Ian both staying together another 4 years, them agreeing to buy the company despite a lack of trust, and then Mythical being willing to sell Smosh without being motivated by Anthony's return. It sounds kind of unlikely, right? Though you might say that Ian and Anthony could have just bought Smosh instead of Mythical at the start of 2019, but no, I don't think that's true. On top of most of their YouTube careers not seeing the financial benefits of owning the company, it's been made pretty clear that Mythical was fairly generous in helping to make the sale happen. They've been very vague on details, but Red and Link have openly joked that part of their excitement for this opportunity stems from their chance to make money as investors in Smosh.
I believe in what you're doing, and so I want to make some money off of that.
And Ian and Anthony have made it clear that they received a price they were very satisfied with.
We will say that every single party is very, very happy with
cool. Yeah. It's also like so complicated, I can't even explain it.
Yeah.
I'm just a YouTuber.
And since, according to Medium, Rhett and Link maintain a minority stake and advisory role, there's a good chance that Ian and Anthony owning Smosh could have never happened any other way. So yeah, it's a cliche to say that the darkest comes before the light, but in the case of Smosh, it couldn't be more true. So I think there's a good lesson here that on the worst day of your life, you can take some solace in knowing that turning everything around is easy. All you have to do is become the biggest channel on YouTube, accidentally give it away for free, have a corporation control your life while sabotaging your reputation, partake in what will be known as one of the worst movies of all time, let this lack of control cause user resentment to build, realize that said resentment has begun to affect a lifelong friendship, lose said friendship while walking away from your company with nothing to show for it, flounder on YouTube in front of millions, asking what you could possibly be thinking, watch the company that owns what will be your legacy going under until yet another company buys it, watch your former best friend advocate for his vision in a way that you needed him 2 years ago, finally find success in your separate venture after over a year, reconnect with your former best friend due to coincidentally bumping into each other, decide to buy back your company after 12 years, and reclaim your company from its new owners who are fortunately creators themselves and so they understand the value in allowing it to happen. And if that's not an option, I don't know, bet it all on Red?